Welcome to Life Stories, where we share deeply moving and relatable journeys of love, family, and the lessons that shape our lives. Today, we bring you the story of Emma, a woman caught between the demanding expectations of a controlling grandmother and the desire to build her own path. As Emma navigates this emotional roller coaster, she learns what it truly means to love and prioritize herself. Join us on this heartfelt journey as we explore the power of standing up for who you are. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to begin today's story. It's hard to describe the emotions I felt as I stood there, watching my daughter Emma's wedding unfold, knowing that this day, which was meant to be a celebration of her love with Ben, was about to be hijacked. But then, that's just how my mother-in-law, Helen, was. Always the center of attention. Always determined that any significant family event should revolve around her. And it was no surprise that her selfishness was now at its peak. Just days before Emma's wedding, Emma had always been a sweet, kind-hearted person. She had spent her entire life accommodating others, from her friends to her family, always putting their needs ahead of her own. Ben, her fiancé, was the same. Together, they made the perfect couple, patient, understanding, and gentle. And when they told us they were getting married in a beautiful vineyard in Napa Valley, the dream wedding they'd always envisioned, I couldn't have been happier for them. A perfect blend of simplicity and elegance. But, of course, not everyone shared that excitement. Specifically, Helen. I had seen Helen's behavior over the years, always expecting things to go her way. It wasn't just the occasional slip-up, it was a pattern. Every birthday, every holiday, every event in our family, she made sure it revolved around her. It didn't matter whether it was her son's birthday or a family reunion, it was always about Helen. If she didn't get the attention she felt she deserved, she would make a scene until the spotlight was back on her. So, when Emma announced her engagement, I knew in my gut that Helen was going to find a way to make it about herself. But I didn't expect her to go so far. It started subtly. Helen began calling Emma constantly, offering unsolicited advice about the wedding. Most of it about the venue. A wedding in a vineyard? That's not dignified enough. You need a grand church. Emma, a real wedding, she insisted. Emma and Ben, of course, politely rejected her suggestions. They had always dreamed of a vineyard wedding, perfect weather, golden sunsets, and an intimate setting that reflected their personalities. But Helen didn't take it well. The rants started. Doesn't Emma care about the family? This isn't just about her and Ben. Helen complained to me one evening, her voice laced with bitterness. She's being selfish, don't you think? I wanted to laugh at her absurdity, but I just replied, maybe she's just being true to what she wants. But it's up to her. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. As the wedding date neared, things escalated. Helen insisted on going dress shopping with Emma, and Emma, ever the kind soul, agreed. I warned her beforehand, but Emma brushed it off. It'll be fine, Mom. How bad can it be? I should have known better. When Helen took Emma to her chosen bridal boutique, it was a disaster from the start. The boutique was known for its extravagant, over-the-top dresses, far from the simple, elegant gown Emma had imagined. I could see it even before they walked in. The extravagant gowns, all dripping in pearls and lace, would never be Emma's style. Emma, darling, try this one on, Helen insisted, pulling out a massive, royal-looking gown. Emma looked at me, her eyes filled with discomfort. Mom, we both know I don't want anything like this. But Helen wasn't having it. She persisted, pulling out dress after dress, all completely unsuitable. Finally, Emma tried on a gown she truly loved, simple, elegant, and graceful. The moment Helen saw it, her face twisted in disgust. That's it? This plain thing? She scoffed, clearly disappointed that Emma wasn't swayed by her choices. But Emma stood firm. I love it, Mom, she said quietly, holding her ground. And, as if to make a point, Helen picked out a white beaded gown for herself, one that looked shockingly like a wedding dress. Helen, that's white, I pointed out, my voice tinged with disbelief. So what? She snapped back, clearly pleased with herself. White suits me. Emma clenched her jaw but said nothing. It was clear that Helen wasn't going to let go easily. The anger simmered beneath the surface. But Emma held her composure. She had a quiet strength that I admired deeply. The wedding was supposed to be about Emma and Ben, two people in love, committing to each other. But instead, Helen seemed to have decided that it was her moment to shine. And she wasn't going to let anything get in the way. The final straw came at the rehearsal dinner. It was supposed to be a small, intimate gathering of close family and friends at a cozy little restaurant. But, of course, Helen invited her own guests, people Emma didn't even know, and seated herself at the head of the table. "This is how it's done," she said, acting as if she were the bride. The entire dinner, she made little jabs at Emma, comparing everything to her own wedding. "When I got married, we had twice as many guests. And it was the event of the year," she remarked, her tone sharp. I watched as Emma tried to ignore her, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. She was doing her best to maintain her composure. But Helen wasn't making it easy. I wanted to step in and say something, but I knew it would only make things worse. Then, during the dinner, Helen stood up with a glass in her hand and tapped it for attention. "I just want to say how grateful I am for this wedding," she began, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "After all, it's a celebration of family. And I am the matriarch of this family. Really, this event should be about me, not just the bride." I could feel the tension in the air. The room fell silent. My stomach dropped. How could she be so bold? But Emma, calm as ever, smiled a slow, knowing smile. "Oh, Grandma," she said sweetly, "then you're going to love this surprise." I could see Helen's face go pale as she eyed Emma suspiciously. What was going on? I had no idea what Emma had planned. But something told me it was going to be good. Little did Helen know, her reign of self-centeredness was about to come to an end. The tension at the rehearsal dinner was unbearable. Everyone in the room had caught on to Helen's self-important remarks. And I could see the uncomfortable glances exchanged between some of the guests. But no one dared speak up, no one except Emma. She had always been the quiet one, the peacekeeper, and yet, in that moment, I saw something new in her eyes. It wasn't anger, but determination. Helen was still holding her glass, waiting for the reaction to her self-proclaimed, matriarchal speech. She clearly thought she'd won the room, that everyone would applaud her for being the center of attention. But Emma wasn't having it. She had made up her mind about how this night was going to go. And despite her calm demeanor, I could see that her patience was wearing thin. "Grandma, I think it's time you heard something," Emma said, her voice steady, but with an edge I hadn't heard before. I could sense a shift in the air. Helen's eyes widened, her grip tightening on her glass. "Emma, what are you?" Helen started to say, her usual confidence faltering slightly. But Emma, never one to be rushed, interrupted. "I'm not going to let this wedding be about anyone but Ben and me. Not today, not tomorrow, and certainly not after everything you've put us through." The silence that followed was deafening. It was almost as if time had frozen. Everyone in the room, from the guests to the staff, seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the storm that was about to break. "You've made this day miserable, Grandma," Emma continued, her eyes fixed on Helen, who looked as though she'd been slapped in the face. "You've constantly belittled our choices, pushed your opinions on us, and tried to turn everything into your personal showcase. And I've stood by, quietly, letting it happen, because I didn't want to cause a scene. But tonight, that ends." I was stunned. Emma had always been so accommodating, so eager to please, that I never imagined she would stand up to Helen this way. But she wasn't done. "I've had enough of the way you've treated me and my fiancé. And I'm done letting you hijack this moment. So here it is, the surprise I promised you." Helen blinked rapidly, her face turning a shade of red that I'd never seen before. "Surprise? What do you mean by surprise?" she snapped, her voice shaking slightly. Emma smiled, but it was cold, controlled. "I know you're all about grand gestures, Grandma, so here's one for you." With that, Emma reached into her purse, pulling out an envelope and placing it on the table in front of Helen. The envelope was thick, official-looking, and Helen eyed it cautiously. "I've arranged for a private meeting with the venue manager tomorrow," Emma said, "and we've decided we're switching the wedding venue. We won't be having the wedding here. at your preferred location. Instead, we'll be hosting it at a more intimate location. Just as we originally planned. The room was dead silent. Helen's face went even paler. Her lips trembling with shock. You can't do that, she cried. Her voice high-pitched, a rare crack in her usually polished demeanor. You have no idea what you're doing. This is my family's legacy. You can't just throw that away. But Emma wasn't shaken. I'm doing this for me. Grandma. For me and Ben. This isn't about family legacies or what's best for anyone else. This is our wedding. We've been polite. We've been patient. And we've let you have your say. But now, it's our turn. Helen was speechless for a moment. Her mouth opening and closing as if she couldn't quite find the words. I watched as her face twisted in confusion, frustration, and a deep-seated anger that was slowly beginning to bubble to the surface. The quiet, composed woman I'd known for years was now unraveling before my eyes. But Emma wasn't done yet. I've spent months trying to make everyone happy, bending over backward to make sure you're pleased with every little detail. But at some point, I had to ask myself, what would make me happy? What do Ben and I want? And the answer was never about impressing you or anyone else. It was always about us. Helen's eyes narrowed. She was seething. But Emma didn't flinch. She was resolute. You've made this whole process about your ego. Grandma, Emma continued, you've tried to control everything. And it's hurtful. But no more. We're taking back control of this wedding. There was a long, tense pause before Helen finally managed to speak. Her voice was cold now, sharp with disdain. You'll regret this. You think you can just push me aside? I've seen people like you. Emma, you'll see who's really in control when this is over. Emma shook her head. I'm not worried about that. What's done is done. I'm just hoping that, for once, you can put your pride aside and be happy for me. The room was still silent as everyone processed what had just happened. I could see the other guests exchange looks of disbelief, admiration, and, dare I say, relief. Finally, someone cleared their throat, breaking the spell that had fallen over the table. Helen, still stunned, stood up abruptly and left the room, muttering something incoherent under her breath. The tension didn't immediately dissipate, but there was a palpable sense of shift, of power returning to where it belonged. With Emma and Ben, I watched my daughter as she sat back down at the table. Her posture still calm, but her eyes filled with a quiet strength. That felt good, she whispered to me, just loud enough for me to hear. And for the first time in months, I felt a small flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, Emma would be able to reclaim her happiness from under the weight of her grandmother's dominance. The silence left in the wake of Emma's confrontation with Helen hung heavy in the air for the rest of the evening. It wasn't just the guests who were uncomfortable, but also those closest to Emma, myself included. I could see the exhaustion settling on her face as she sat back down. Her hands folded in front of her on the table, almost as though she were trying to hold onto something stable amid the chaos she'd just stirred up. She was quiet now, no longer full of the bravado that had marked her speech earlier. But I could tell she was more at peace than I had ever seen her. Emma, are you all right? I asked, my voice gentle but laced with concern. She looked at me, and for a moment, I thought she might break down. Instead, she smiled faintly, a smile that was more about release than happiness. I'm okay, Mom, she said softly. It just needed to be said. I think I finally did what I should have done a long time ago. Her words struck me deeply. For as long as I could remember, Emma had tried to please everyone around her, her grandmother, her father, me. She'd always been the one to keep the peace, even at the expense of her own needs and desires. Watching her assert herself so fiercely that night felt like witnessing the birth of a new person. It was both awe-inspiring and heartbreaking, knowing how much it had cost her to get to this point. The guests, though still reeling from the tension, started to ease back into their conversations, as if the spark of conflict had brought everything into sharper focus. Ben, of course, had been quietly watching the entire exchange. I could see the love and admiration in his eyes as he looked at Emma. For all the emotional upheaval, the one constant in the room was the bond between them, strong, unshakable, and very much a team. But I couldn't help but feel the weight of what had happened. The evening had started as a celebration, but now it was tinged with a bitterness that would be hard to shake. As much as I admired Emma's courage, I knew this wasn't over. Helen was not someone who took rejection lightly, and her pride was not easily dented. I could already see the storm clouds forming in her mind, and I dreaded the fallout that was sure to come. Helen wasn't the type to forgive and forget, and her reaction had shown just how deep her need for control ran. Later, as I helped Emma get ready for bed, she seemed distant, lost in thought. I was about to ask if she wanted to talk, but she beat me to it. "Do you think I did the right thing, Mom?" she asked, her voice a little shaky. She didn't look at me, but her question was heavy with uncertainty. I sat next to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Sweetheart, you did what you had to do. You stood up for yourself. And you set a boundary. It's never easy to do that, especially with someone you love, even if they're difficult, but you're not responsible for her happiness. You're responsible for your own. And you've made a choice that's best for you and Ben. I'm proud of you." Emma didn't say anything for a long time. I could tell she was processing, still trying to reconcile the strength she'd shown with the tenderness she'd always carried. "I know," she finally murmured, her voice quiet, "but I don't want to lose her. Mom, I don't want to lose Grandma." Her words broke my heart. The love Emma had for her grandmother was real. Despite everything that had happened, it wasn't just about tradition or obligation, it was genuine. A bond built over years of family holidays, birthday cakes, and quiet moments shared in the garden. It was a love that had been twisted and manipulated. Yes, but it was still there. "You don't have to lose her, Emma," I said softly, "but sometimes, people need to be reminded that love isn't about control. It's about respect. And you've done that tonight. You've shown her that you're not a little girl anymore. That you're capable of making your own choices. It may take time, but she'll understand eventually." Emma's eyes welled up, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But instead, she took a deep breath, wiping away the tear that had fallen. "I hope so, Mom. I really do. I just wish things could be different." "I know," I said, pulling her into a hug. "I know." We sat like that for a while, the quiet comfort of my embrace grounding us both. There was no resolution yet, no certainty about what the future would hold. But in that moment, I knew that Emma had made the first step toward her own freedom. And that, in itself, was enough. But as we sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that Helen's reaction was only the beginning. I braced myself for the storm that was surely coming. As the months passed, life seemed to return to a fragile sort of normalcy. Emma and I grew closer, our bond stronger than it had ever been. She continued to navigate the complexities of her relationship with her grandmother. But there was a newfound sense of peace in her decisions. She no longer sought approval at the expense of her own happiness. And with Ben by her side, I could see her becoming the woman I always knew she could be, confident, assertive, and unapologetically herself. Helen, on the other hand, didn't fade away quietly. There were still occasional attempts to stir the pot, texts, passive-aggressive comments, even a few attempts to rekindle old tensions. But Emma remained steady, and each time, she stood firm in her boundaries. The woman who once bent under the weight of others' expectations now held her ground with grace. The real turning point came months later when Helen reached out to Emma. It wasn't an apology, but it was a step, a gesture of reconciliation. I watched Emma, now a woman who had learned to prioritize herself, carefully consider her next move. She chose to forgive, not for Helen, but for herself. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. As I watched my daughter embrace her growth, I couldn't help but feel proud. Emma had learned the greatest lesson of all, that love, while important, doesn't mean sacrificing your own well-being for the sake of others. And in that, she had become her own strongest ally. Thank you for reading this story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt life stories that touch the soul.